They say assassins are monsters, that they feel nothing, that they vanish into crowds with no conscience, no consequence. But that's not the truth. That's just what makes it easier to sleep at night. The real story begins on a cliffside in Santorini, where the sun dies a little more beautifully every evening, and secrets sink deeper than the sea. Elias sat there, still as the crumbling ruins behind him, staring out over the wind-dark water. To a stranger, he might have looked like a tourist, weathered boots, hands in pockets, salt-stung eyes. But if you looked closer, if you really looked to'd, see it? The man was haunted. He hadn't killed anyone in 3 years. Not since the night in Damascus. Not since he walked away from the veil. But that didn't matter. The ghosts stayed. They don't care if you stopped pulling the trigger. They care that you ever did. It was supposed to be a simple job. She was a journalist, 36, French Algerian. She had published one too many truths in a world addicted to convenient lies. Elias had followed her for 6 days through the old alleys and rooftop cafes. He had memorized the rhythm of her footsteps, the way she touched her necklace when she was nervous, the way she always left food for strays. He knew everything about her, everything except why he couldn't do it. He watched her one night, sitting at an outdoor table, scribbling notes with a cheap pen. There was no security, no fear in her eyes, only focus. And that's when he saw it. The problem wasn't her, it was him. He couldn't feel the justification. He couldn't hear the mantra that had once been so loud in his head. Only the guilty, only for balance, only with cause. That night, he vanished, disappeared from the veil, burned every identity, cut every contact, and came here to the place where silence felt sacred. Santorini. But peace isn't real for people like Elias. It's just a softer kind of punishment. Every morning, he walked the same path to the cliff's edge. Every night, he sat beneath the same fading stone arch and wrote letters he never sent. To the dead, to the living, to himself. He had thought walking away would mean leaving the code behind. But the code didn't live on paper. It lived in him. In every decision. In every regret. He'd seen how the world turned assassins into myths. The cool loner, the efficient killer, the heartless professional. But that was never the truth. Not for him. Not for the ones who cared too much. The real assassins, the ones worth fearing, were the ones who questioned everything and did it anyway. You see, the Veil wasn't just a group. It was a belief system. A global network built not on money, but on conviction. Justice, precision, balance. They didn't take contracts. They took causes. They didn't kill for politics or profit. They killed to restore something the world had forgotten, accountability. But somewhere along the way, the lines blurred, people changed, and so did the mission. Elias had trained in Istanbul's underground, learned the ancient languages of poisons and shadows, recited proverbs from Persian masters between knife drills and silence meditations. He had slept in caves, cathedrals, city rooftops. He had taken lives with blades, wire, and fire, but never without the code, never without the whisper in his ear. Only the guilty dot, until Damascus, until her name was Amira. He never told anyone that, never said it out loud, saying it made it real. Saying it made what he did, what he didn't, do matter more. And so he wrote it down instead. Every day, every morning, her name. He remembered the briefing. The handler had spoken with the usual precision. Target is publishing names linked to black market arms. She's exposing our counterweights. She's making herself a liability. But Elias had watched her laugh with a child at a street stand, had seen her run across traffic to save a limping dog. And something in him cracked. The night he didn't kill her, something else died. The part of him that believed he was still clean. Now, 3 years later, the organization was still out there. Maybe they thought he was dead. Maybe they didn't care. But he knew better. You never leave the veil, not without being watched. not without being remembered. So Elias stayed hidden in plain sight, helping tourists find the best wine, reading old philosophy texts in cafe corners, listening, watching, waiting, until he met her, Kiran. She didn't look like a killer, but neither did he. That's the point. She had come looking for answers, for someone who knew the weight of a life taken, for someone who could help her carry what was coming. Elias didn't want to be her mentor. He didn't want to be part of anything again, but he saw it in her eyes, the same storm he once carried, the same question, what do I become after the first time? And so the story begins again, not with a kill, but with a choice. Elias stood from the cliff edge and looked toward the sea. Somewhere out there, the veil still moved in silence. Somewhere out there, another target was being studied. Another line was being crossed, but not here, not yet. He turned toward the village path, where Kiran waited under the olive trees. You ready? She asked. No, he replied, but I think you are. And together, they walked into the quiet, into the myth, into the kind of truth that never makes the news. Because sometimes, the most dangerous assassin isn't the one who kills, it's the one who stops. If this story has pulled you in, if you feel the weight and the silence between each word, consider subscribing to this channel. It's what keeps stories like this alive and what gives us the strength to keep digging deeper. There's so much more to uncover, and believe me, that this was only the beginning. There are cities that hum with electricity, and there are cities that hum with something older. Varanasi was the latter. It didn't just exist, it remembered. The cobbled streets murmured stories into the ankles of barefoot pilgrims. The river didn't rush, it spoke. And above all, the sky painted with ash, flame, and fog felt like it had seen too much to ever look surprised. Kiran had never believed in sacred places. She had spent most of her life believing in systems, courts, laws. Her older sister, Asha, had been the same until those very systems turned on her. Asha had been an attorney, fierce, brilliant, always tired. She fought like someone who had read every page of every broken law and still thought, maybe justice was something you could pin down long enough to matter. Kiran remembered the night she found her sister's body hanging, alone, in their Delhi apartment. The police called it suicide. Kiran called it bullshit. Asha had been working on something sensitive, a leak, names of brokers who moved unregistered arms through Eastern Europe. She had been scared, careful. Then suddenly, she was gone. Kiran didn't scream, she didn't weep. She packed Asha's files into a waterproof bag, left her job at the cultural center, and went silent. For months, she hunted. Not for the killer he was faceless, but for the current that carried him. The network, the system that protected him. And that's when the first message came. No name, no sender. Just a sealed envelope on the railing of a guest house she'd only just checked into. Inside, a symbol etched in charcoal on ivy-wrapped dagger and a single line of text. The world keeps its secrets. We do not. The letter was burned in a temple fire that night, but something inside her ignited too. Weeks later, she found herself in Varanasi, standing at the edge of the Ganges, watching bodhis burn. A man in a gray robe stood beside her, old, thin, almost invisible. You're late, he said. She didn't ask how he knew her name. They walked in silence to the southern edge of the city, where the tourists thinned and the air smelled more like iron than incense. The building was ancient, temple-like, but there were no idols inside, only darkness, and voices that came from no mouths. Kiran followed the man through winding stone tunnels until they reached a subterranean chamber lit only by fire, reflecting off water. She saw them then, figures seated in silence, not watching her, watching the fire. Then one stood. Elias. She hadn't known what he looked like until that moment. She had expected someone taller, more imposing. Instead, She saw something scarier dash stillness. He approached without a sound and looked her over. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. She said nothing. "This is not a sanctuary," he continued. "It's not a school, and it's definitely not a crusade. You're not here to become a hero. You're here to bury yourself." She almost walked away, but he stepped aside and revealed a stone basin in the floor, filled with blackened water. "Once you speak the oath, it never leaves you. Even if you run, even if you change your name, it becomes the last truth you ever get to own." She stared at the water. It looked bottomless. "I'm not here to kill," she said. "No one ever is. Not the first time. I'm here for my sister." "Then speak for her." That's when they handed her the blade. It was small, elegant, dull along the edges. This wasn't for cutting. It was ceremonial, a symbol. Kiran stepped forward. The chamber fell into deeper silence, the kind that makes your heartbeat feel too loud. She held the blade above the basin and whispered the words, ancient, weighty. Each syllable felt like it had claws. "I bind my voice to silence, my heart to justice, my life to the shadows. I serve no master but the balance. My loyalty is eternal." Then she pressed the tip of the blade into her palm, not deep, just enough. The blood fell in a single, clean line into the water. No applause, no praise, only firelight and breath. Later, Elias found her alone in the corridor. "Do you feel different?" he asked. She looked down at her hand. The cut had already stopped bleeding. "No," she said. "Good. The ones who feel powerful afterward there. The ones who break." She turned to him. "Is this what you do? Recruit grief-stricken women to avenge the world?" "No, I listen. And when someone whispers loud enough, I answer." Kiran's jaw clenched. "I'm not like you." "I hope not," he said. "But you will be, if you stay." That night, she slept on stone. No mattress, no warmth, just silence. But her dreams were loud. Asha's voice echoed in every corridor, not accusing, not afraid, just unfinished. The training began at sunrise, not in combat, not in weapons, in restraint. She spent weeks learning the art of silence, how to watch a room without entering it, how to read intention in the twitch of a jaw, the flick of a glance, how to kill noise outside and in. She practiced knots, disguises, the architecture of pain, pressure points that whispered instead of screamed. But the hardest lesson wasn't about death. It was about hesitation. One day Elias took her to a rooftop overlooking a crowded spice market. Below, a man walked through the chaos, shoulders hunched, movements quick, paranoid. "He's not your target," Elias said, "but I want you to follow him anyway. For 5 hours, learn everything, but don't let him know." Kiran obeyed. She followed him through narrow alleys, tea stalls, a train station. She watched him buy roses and drop them at a grave. When she returned, she asked, "What was the point?" Elias replied, "You felt sorry for him, didn't you?" She didn't answer. "That's the point." Another night, she found Elias sharpening a knife with his fingers wrapped in cloth. "You've killed a lot of people," she said. "Yes. Do you remember them?" "Only the ones I didn't." She tilted her head. "Didn't what?" "Didn't want to." The days turned into months. Her body hardened, her mind sharpened. But something inside stayed fragile. The part of her that still dreamed of Asha. The part that whispered, "Don't become the thing you hate." One evening, during a simulation, she refused to strike. The target had played the role too well. A woman, screaming, begging. It felt real. Afterward, Elias pulled her aside. "You think mercy is weakness," he said, "but it's not. It's a luxury, and you won't always have it." "What if I never want it?" she said. "What if I want to feel nothing?" He stepped closer. "Then you'll become the exact kind of monster we exist to stop." Something cracked in her that night. Not broke cracked. a letting in, a light. That was the thing about the veil. It didn't make you someone new. It forced you to meet who you already were, under pressure, in silence, at night. The last part of her training was a test with no name. They took her to a compound outside the city. Inside, a man waited blindfolded, restrained. This man arranged the execution of 2 journalists in Ukraine, Elias told her. He's real. This isn't a drill. She looked at the man, his face bruised, broken. She looked at Elias. No one will know, he said. This is yours. She lifted the blade, then stopped. I don't want this, she said. Then don't do it. I want the truth, she said. I want his confession. Elias smiled not with joy, but with recognition. Then make him talk, he said. Did he confess? And for the first time Kiran understood. Power wasn't in taking a life. It was in choosing not to at the exact moment. When no one would stop you, she passed. Not because she killed, but because she didn't need to. Weeks later, she returned to the chamber beneath Varanasi, alone. The water still waited, dark, patient. She knelt beside it and whispered her sister's name into the basin. No ritual, no blade, just memory, and the weight of the oath settling not into her skin, but into her soul. This wasn't about revenge. This was about balance, and she was ready. Snow had a way of softening the edges of things, as if the world itself was trying to whisper forgiveness. But in Prague, even snow felt like silence with a blade in its pocket. The castle stood above the city like a sleeping god, watching centuries bleed into stone. Beneath it, in tunnels forgotten by most, the veil kept its heart beating in shadows. Kiran had never seen this part of the world. Prague was ancient, like Varanasi, but colder, cleaner, the kind of clean that comes from hiding. Bloodwell? She followed Elias through the catacombs, their footsteps swallowed by vaulted stone. The air smelled of dust, iron, and the faint perfume of burned parchment. He didn't speak. He hadn't for hours. When they reached the chamber, the others were already there, masked. Still, 12 of them sat in silence, elders, tacticians, executioners. At the center, bound to a chair, with cords braided in ritual knots, was a man Kiran had only heard about. Nico. She had seen his name in files. A data ghost. A protégé in encryption. Elias once mentioned him in a whisper, the way people speak of old friends they don't know how to mourn. Now, he looked nothing like a legend. Thin, pale, eyes rimmed red, not from tears, but from staying awake too long. He stared at the floor, not ashamed, something worse. Hollow. Kiran took her place along the wall. Elias stood alone before the tribunal. The evidence is irrefutable, said one of the council. 3 safe houses compromised, 4 operatives dead, and the encryption key used was traced to this man's access port. Nico didn't flinch. Elias remained quiet. Another voice followed. Do you deny it? Nico looked up. His voice was soft, like someone who'd already bled everything that mattered. No, don't deny it. But I didn't sell us out. I made a mistake. I was rerouting our archival records for long-term safety. A third-party node intercepted the line. I didn't see the breach in time. There was silence. Not disbelief. Not accusation. Just calculation. And you didn't tell anyone? Elias asked. Nico's throat worked. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. I was wrong. The word wrong hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Kiran could feel it, something between Elias and Nico that no one else in the room understood. Not tension, not anger, grief. You were supposed to be our firewall, one of the council said flatly. The one who could detect these things before they happened. I was, Nico replied, and I failed. Kiran wanted to look away, but she couldn't. The scene didn't feel like justice. It felt like a funeral. Elias finally stepped forward. I trained him. I brought him in. I vouched for him. The room held its breath. I still do. Elias continued. I believe he didn't act with malice. But belief doesn't resurrect the dead. He turned to Nico. You should have told me. I know. You think silence protects people, but sometimes silence kills them. I was ashamed. Elias nodded. Then you've already punished yourself more than we ever could. The council debated for hours. Kiran didn't hear all of it. She drifted in and out of thoughts. She remembered her own silence in the face of grief, the mistakes she almost made by keeping things in, and she saw now how heavy a burden it was not just to keep a secret, but to keep one and still call yourself loyal. When the sentence came, it was worse than execution. Exile from the veil wasn't banishment, it was erasure. No contact, no refuge, no voice. You lived, but you didn't exist. Elias walked Nico to the outer corridor himself. Neither man spoke until they reached the final threshold, the door that led back into the waking world. Nico stopped. You still wear the pendant? Elias reached beneath his shirt and pulled out a wooden token worn smooth by time, a symbol carved into it, a sanctuary they had built together in Istanbul long ago. You gave me this, Elias said. Nico nodded. Keep it? I don't need it anymore. That's not true, Elias said. You just don't believe you deserve it. A faint laugh escaped Nico's lips. Still philosophical, huh? Elias didn't smile. Still stubborn. They stood like that for a moment, two men held together by a history that now had a fracture running through the center. Then Nico turned and walked into the snow, coat pulled tight, head low. When Elias returned to the chamber, Kiran met him outside. Was that mercy? She asked. He didn't answer right away. No, he said. Mercy is when you forgive someone who hurt you. That wasn't mercy. That was trust dying slowly. She watched him walk down the corridor, shoulders heavier than before. That night, she found herself awake long after the fire had dimmed. She stared at the ceiling of the sanctuary, the ancient stone etched with symbols she hadn't learned yet, and she thought about silence, how silence could save you, and how it could drown you. She thought of Asha, of how her sister had died alone, keeping too many truths too deeply buried. She thought of Nico, how he had tried to protect everyone and, in doing so, condemned himself. She thought of Elias, how loyalty had become a wound he kept reopening just to make sure it still bled. And then she thought of herself, of the things she still hadn't said. At sunrise, she walked to the edge of the old city and watched the snow melt into the cobblestones. The cold didn't feel cruel anymore. It felt clarifying. Elias joined her in silence. She spoke first. You trusted him, and he let you down. I've let people down too, Elias said. That's why I don't throw stones. She turned to him. Do you think we're all doomed to betray the people we love? He considered this. I think we all make choices that make sense at the time, and later, when the world has shifted and pain has clarified everything, we look back and realize those choices cost someone something we didn't see. Kiran swallowed. Do you still believe in the veil? I believe in what it used to be. I believe in what it could be again, and in me. Elias looked at her, steady and unsparing. You're the only one I do. They stood there a little longer before heading back below, where the fire waited, and the silence had room to heal, because some betrayals don't come with blood. They come with hesitation, with silence, and with the weight of knowing you were the one who should have said something before it was too late. Fez was alive in a way that made you forget you were mortal. The city pulsed with old rhythm, older than language, older than empire. It wasn't loud, not like Cairo or Istanbul. Fez was quieter, but not soft. The silence here was coiled, watchful. The alleys twisted like veins around the heart of the Medina. Cobbled paths led to ancient archways, where the air changed temperature just by turning a corner. It was Ramadan, and the city moved slower in daylight, as if fasting had shifted time itself. But when night came, everything cracked open: shops, laughter, prayers, secrets. The veil had sent them here not for redemption, but to prevent chaos. A diplomat, Western, wealthy, untouchable, was in Fez for a private meeting. On the surface, it was about trade. Underneath, it was about arms. He funded proxy wars through shadow channels, masked by donations to NGOs and cultural grants. Clean hands, dirty fingerprints. Kiran was on edge the moment they landed. This wasn't like Prague. It wasn't like Varanasi. There, the shadows had weight. Here, they flickered, moved too quickly, smelled like rosewater and sweat. Imran met them in a courtyard at sunset, where birds darted between rooftop antennas, and the call to prayer echoed off every brick. He was older than she expected, taller too. His beard had streaks of silver. His eyes didn't flinch. There was something unshakable in the way he moved. Not cautious, not arrogant, anchored. Kiran had heard of him through whispers in the sanctuaries. Imran, the Ismaili, the one who fasted between missions, the one who quoted scripture while loading a rifle. She wasn't sure what to expect. Faith made her nervous. Not because she lacked it, but because people who used it often seemed to think it gave them permission to stop asking questions. But Imran didn't speak in absolutes. He greeted her not with praise or challenge but a question. "Do you feel ready?" She didn't answer. Instead, she followed him into the dark. Their safe house was disguised as a spice vendor's back room. Beneath sacks of cumin and turmeric was a hatch that led to a chamber lit by blue lanterns. The city above disappeared the moment the hatch closed. Below, it smelled like history. Imran unfolded a prayer mat before speaking again. "This mission won't feel like justice. It will feel like delay, like postponing a sickness." Kiran raised an eyebrow. "Then why not finish it completely?" "Because the world doesn't heal in clean lines," he said. "It twists, and if we try to straighten it too fast, we break it worse." He didn't say much else, just prayed and waited. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, her thoughts chewing through themselves. Elias had said Imran was a man of peace, but she had seen the files. He had been behind at least 17 missions, each one surgical, clean, final dot. She didn't know how anyone could pray after that. At midnight, they moved. The diplomat's private meeting was to take place in a riad deep in the Medina, accessible on foot. No motorcade, no guards in uniform, just quiet mercenaries in Western shoes, waiting in plain clothes behind carved doors. Kiran perched on the rooftop opposite. Her heart beat steady now, not calm, but focused. Below, she could see Imran kneeling in the dark, just outside the courtyard, waiting for the signal. The diplomat arrived late, not alone. With him, a girl 6, maybe 7 years old. His daughter, Kiran, tennis. This wasn't in the file. She clicked once on the comms. Imran's breath crackled back, low and steady. "Abort?" she asked. He didn't respond right away. Then, "Hold." The girl ran ahead of the diplomat, chasing a paper lantern drifting down the stone path. She laughed in uninhibited sound that didn't belong anywhere near this kind of night. Kiran's finger hovered over the transmitter. She could see the shot, clean, a breath away, but something in her recoiled. Imran remained still, a stone, and the river. The diplomat disappeared behind the riad door. The girl followed. The opportunity closed. Later, back at the safe house, tempers boiled. One of the local operatives slammed a water bottle against the wall. "We had the window." He was exposed. She wouldn't have even known. She would have remembered the silence, Imran said. "That kind of quiet never leaves you." Kiran remained silent. She didn't agree with the anger, but she understood it. The mission hadn't failed. It had paused, and that pause meant risk, exposure, delay. But she couldn't stop hearing the girl's laugh. After the others left, Imran sat by the window, watching the moon. "Do you believe in sin?" he asked. Kiran leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I believe in consequences. He nodded slowly. Some people kill with their hands, others with their silence. Some kill with money, others with belief. She looked at him, and us. We kill with purpose, he said. The difference is we're the only ones who have to feel it afterward. Kiran exhaled. That girl could have died. She didn't. But what if that was our only chance? Then God will test us again, Imran said. She studied his face. There was no righteousness in it. No superiority, only fatigue. You ever regret it? She asked. All the time, he said. But I fear the day I stop. The next evening, they intercepted the diplomat's driver in an alley outside the souk. No kill, just information. Under pressure, the driver folded, revealed the real meeting had been postponed due to surveillance. Someone had warned the diplomat. There was a leak. Again, Kiran felt the old frustration return. Betrayal always moved faster than trust, she asked. Imran, what's the point of faith if the world keeps rotting anyway? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Faith isn't about results. It's about endurance, about not becoming the thing you fight. She wanted to scoff, but she didn't, because somewhere inside, she knew that answer mattered even if she wasn't ready to believe it yet. They left Fez 2 nights later. No blood spilled, no headlines. Just a delay in a war no one would ever admit was happening. But something stayed with Kiran, a tension she couldn't shake as the plane took off. She watched the lights of the city fade beneath the clouds. She turned to Imran. That girl. She'll never know how close she came. She doesn't need to, he said. But we will. Imran nodded. And that's why we keep fasting. Kiran raised an eyebrow. It's not Ramadan anymore. He smiled softly. It never really ends, not for us. And in that moment, Kiran understood something she hadn't before. The veil wasn't just about justice. It was about restraint, about letting the fire burn without becoming it. And in a world full of monsters, sometimes the bravest thing you could do was not strike. Vienna always felt like a city between decisions. It carried the elegance of history like a tailored coat, neat, pressed, and lined with ghosts. Its symmetry was deceptive. Behind the music and the marble, there was fracture. Elias had always found that comforting, in a strange way. Beauty that didn't pretend it was pure. Tonight, the opera house looked exactly as it always had. Golden balconies, velvet seats, carved columns soaked in soft lighting. But underneath it, in a chamber older than the empire itself, something was breaking. The room smelled of paper, iron, and the slow decay of civility. 12 chairs, arranged in a ring, each filled with a voice that could authorize death. They had gathered in secret dozens of times over the years, reviewing missions, preserving balance, arguing ethics. But tonight wasn't about mission oversight. Tonight was about rebellion. Lucien stood at the center of the circle, like a man on trial and a man delivering the verdict all at once. His voice was calm, measured, almost academic. The world has changed, he said, and we've refused to change with it. That is our mistake. The veil is no longer a surgical tool. It's an artifact. We've become a cautionary tale in a world that needs execution. He paused, looking directly at Elias. You trained me. You taught me discipline. But discipline without evolution is just slow suicide. Elias didn't move. His expression, unreadable. Kiran stood at the perimeter of the room, watching with quiet fury. This was her first full council. She hadn't spoken, not yet. Lucien continued, pacing. We've limited ourselves with ancient code skill, only when necessary, never for politics, never without balance. But balance doesn't exist anymore. There is only momentum, control. We either adapt, or we vanish. He held up a dossier, thick and bound in black leather. These are names. Names of warlords, financiers, brokers of suffering. All known, all protected, We've had chances to strike, but we hesitated, and they flourished. One of the elders shifted. And you believe the solution is to become what we swore to avoid? Lucien smiled. I believe in winning. Kiran felt something twist in her stomach. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Disappointment. Lucien turned to the council again. I propose a vote. We restructure leadership. Eliminate dead weight. Create new alliances, governments, corporations, intelligence agencies willing to offer cover in exchange for services. The word services hung like smoke. Elias finally spoke. That's not partnership, that's corruption. Lucien's tone remained steady. You call it corruption, I call it relevance. And what about loyalty? Elias asked. Lucien's mouth tightened. Loyalty to what? To a set of rules we created before drones and surveillance and AI. Loyalty to a purity that's never existed in the world we operate in. Kiran stepped forward. Loyalty to each other, she said. To the people who died believing they weren't just hired blades. Lucien looked at her with something that might have once been admiration. You speak like someone who hasn't had to make the hard calls yet. She didn't blink. And you speak like someone who's forgotten why he made them in the first place. A silence settled longer this time, the kind that threatened to change everything. Then, Elias turned to the council. I vote no. I vote to remain who we are. Not because I'm afraid to evolve, but because I've seen what happens when evolution means erosion. One by one, the others cast their votes. The chamber was split. Half aligned with Lucien's vision of efficiency, half with Elias's defense of the old code. Only one vote remained, the Tiebreaker.Kiran. She hadn't expected it. She wasn't ready, but the moment arrived anyway. She stepped into the center of the circle. I joined the Veil after my sister was murdered, she began. I came here angry, broken, desperate, for something clean. I thought killing the right people would make the pain mean something. She looked at Lucien, but I learned something else. That we don't bring peace by spilling blood. We bring peace by being the ones who still believe it's sacred. She turned slowly to the rest. If we become tools for power, we lose the right to call ourselves anything more than mercenaries. She paused. I vote no. Lucien didn't flinch. He nodded. Lips pressed tight. So be it, he said. But everyone in that room knew it wasn't over. After the meeting dissolved, Elias found Lucien standing alone in the colonnade outside, lit by the yellow glow of gas lamps. You were never going to take the vote seriously, Elias said quietly. Lucien didn't deny it. I had contingencies, he said. Agreements already in motion. They'll move without the veil if they must. Then you've already left us, Elias said. All this was theater. Lucien looked up at the stars. You can't protect an idea forever. Sometimes you have to become something else. Elias stepped closer. If you come after anyone under my protection, I'll consider that war. Lucien turned to him. You don't have the numbers. No, Elias said. But I still have the soul, eh? Pause then. Lucien said the one thing that stuck. You'll regret this. And he walked into the dark, his shadow swallowed by the streets of Vienna. Elias didn't move for a long time. Later, Kiran sat beside him in the old sanctuary's atrium. The night was quiet. The air smelled faintly of ash and wet stone. Do you think he meant it? She asked. He always means it, Elias replied. Will he come back? He never really left. She looked at him. How do you fight someone you used to respect? Elias leaned back against the wall, his voice low. You don't fight the man. You fight the idea he's become. Kiran nodded, though something in her broke. Not because Lucien was the enemy, but because he had once been family, and nothing cuts deeper than betrayal from someone who once believed the same things you did. Kyoto was not a city, it was a breath held between centuries. Even in summer, it felt still. The wind moved like memory. The temples didn't seem to sit on the earth. They hovered, suspended between the living and the gone. Elias had come here, not to find something, but to bury what remained. He hadn't spoken to Kiran in 3 days. Not because he was angry, because he didn't know what language to use anymore. The betrayal in Vienna had changed him, not in the obvious ways. His voice was the same. His movements measured, but something behind his eyes had gone quieter. Something old, something foundational, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace but from exhaustion. They had come to Kyoto under false names, through separate flights, using paths known only to ghosts. The veil had gone dark for now. What remained of it was scattered. Lucien had vanished, but the ripples of his defiance were already reshaping the ocean in the foothills beyond Arashiyama. There was a temple no longer open to tourists. The monks there had no names, no clocks, no conversations. They tended the grounds, prayed, and disappeared before questions could form. Elias had lived among them once, many years ago, before Kiran, before the fracture, before Damascus. Now he had returned, not as a warrior, not even as a seeker, but as someone asking a question with no words. The master greeted them on the third morning. He didn't bow, he didn't ask their names. He simply gestured toward a stone path that led to the eastern wing. There was a room there, he said. A room with no corners, a room of mirrors. You enter alone, he said in slow, deliberate English, and whatever you see is yours to carry. Not all who enter return the same. Elias didn't hesitate. Kiran waited outside, watching the light filter through bamboo slats as cicadas droned in the silence. She tried to meditate, to breathe, but her thoughts unraveled too quickly. When Elias stepped out an hour later, his face looked untouched, but something in him felt thinner, like a thread worn too close to breaking. He didn't speak. He just nodded to the master, then walked past her, barefoot, into the garden, her turn. The mirror room wasn't large. No windows, no lights, just polished walls on every side, floor to ceiling. They didn't reflect her body so much as her presence. She didn't see herself. She saw variations of herself as wider, younger, angrier, older, tired, resigned. It was like standing in the middle of her own unspoken decisions. At first, she laughed quietly, the absurdity of it. But then she saw her sister, Asha, not real, just a reflection, but real enough. Kiran stepped toward it, hand trembling. Her sister said nothing. She only looked back with that knowing expression, the one she always wore when Kiran was about to lie to herself. And Kiran broke, not all at once, not with drama. She just folded. Her knees hit the stone floor. Her breath came out in fragments, and she said the thing she hadn't said to anyone, not to Elias, not even to herself. I don't know who I am without the anger. The words echoed, not in the room, in her. The reflection shifted. It was her face now, not ashes, but younger, fresh from university, bright-eyed. Before the world became sharp, she whispered to that version of herself, "I'm sorry I let you disappear." The mirror didn't respond. It didn't need to, because in that silence, she remembered everything she'd tried not to feel. The terror, the guilt, the hunger to matter. The belief that if she just struck hard enough, fast enough, the pain would stop following her. She sat in that room until her legs went numb, until her heartbeat returned to its own rhythm. And when she stood, the reflections didn't look like strangers anymore. They looked like facets. She emerged into the courtyard, just as the wind picked up. Elias sat beneath a ginkgo tree, eyes half closed, posture straight but soft. He looked at her and didn't speak. He didn't need to, that night. They shared tea in silence, watching the lanterns flicker. Kiran finally asked, "What did you see in there?" Elias stared into his cup. "The boy I used to be," he said. "The one who thought taking lives would make the world fair." She leaned back, Did he say anything? Elias shook his head. He just looked at me like he didn't recognize who I'd become. They sat that way for a long time. Then Kiran said, I think I want to rebuild it. The veil? Elias asked. She nodded. But not the old version. Not secretive. Not sacred. Something else. Something honest. He tilted his head. Honesty doesn't keep you alive. No, she said. But maybe it keeps you human. He smiled then, just barely. You sound like someone who's ready to lead. She looked up at the stars. I'm tired of surviving, she said. I want to build something worth dying for. He reached into his coat and pulled out the old pendant, wooden, etched, smoothed by years of being held but never forgotten. Then you'll need this, he said. She took it with reverence, not because it was a symbol of power, but because it was a reminder of who had fallen carrying it. That night, before sleep, Kiran stood at the edge of the temple cliff, wind brushing through her hair, and for the first time in years, she felt the rage go quiet. Not gone, just quiet, like a fire that still burned, but no longer needed to consume everything in its path. She whispered into the wind, Asha, I remember, and the wind didn't answer. But it didn't need to, because silence, when earned, says enough. Lisbon welcomed dusk, like an old friend, softly, slowly, with gold-tipped shadows stretching across the cobblestones. The air smelled of sea salt, citrus, and faint electricity. As the sky faded into lavender and smoke, the city began its ritual. Windows opening, street lamps flickering to life. Voices rising from tiny cafes tucked into alleyways like secrets. But underneath the warmth, there was tension. Something was about to end. Kiran stood at the edge of the Alfama district, looking down at the city from a ruined overlook where Roman walls met Moorish stone. Her hands were steady, her breath quiet. She had become something different in the past year. Harder, yes, sharper, but not cold. Never cold. If anything, she had grown warmer, like iron left in flame too long. Tempered, not broken. Beside her, Elias leaned against the wall, older now, slower, but no less precise. He had returned from Kyoto, a man lighter in spirit, but heavier in decisions. He didn't speak often anymore, but when he did, every word felt earned. The mission wasn't complicated. On paper, at least, Lucian had re-emerged. He had orchestrated a private summit between compromised global figures, people too dangerous to leave unchecked, too powerful to face public justice. The meeting would take place in a restored 16th century palace near the riverbank. The gathering was meant to finalize an untraceable weapons network cloaked under a humanitarian tech initiative. But the Valor, what was left of it, was watching. And Kiran had rebuilt it, not in secret halls or cryptic codes, but in whispers passed between activists, cyber specialists, disillusioned intelligence agents, not soldiers, witnesses, people who believed that truth could be sharp enough to cut corruption wide open. This would be their first coordinated strike, not an assassination, an exposure. Their goal: prevent a political destabilization, protect the one clean diplomat in the room, and intercept Lucian before his exit plan activated. They had 46 minutes. Elias and Kiran moved separately through the narrow streets of Lisbon, weaving between tourists, locals, and the invisible weight of what might come. The plan unraveled fast. Inside the palace, the diplomata woman from Senegal was already targeted. Lucian's operatives had disguised themselves as security. The trap had been set deeper than they anticipated. Kiran made the call without hesitation. She entered through the kitchen, silent as breath. 2 guards went down in under 12 seconds. She slipped into the marble corridor just as the diplomat's voice rose, firm but underlined with panic. No, I did not authorize this meeting. Who are a gun cocked? Kiran stepped into the light, body tense, eyes locked on the man holding the weapon. I wouldn't, she said. The man turned and froze. Not because of her stance, but because Elias stood behind him now, silent and ghost-like, a wire wrapped in his palm. The takedown was clean, but the shot still fired. It missed the diplomat but grazed Kiran. She didn't fall. She didn't cry out. She just pressed her palm to her ribs and kept moving. Because the mission wasn't over, Lucian was already on the roof. Elias found him there, alone, staring at the city below like it belonged to him. "I knew you'd come," Lucian said without turning. "You always assume that's a compliment," Elias replied. Lucian turned then. His face was older, but his eyes were the same, bright with conviction. "Twisted by ego, you could have had a place in this," he said. "You still can. There's room for you." Elias stepped forward. "I'm not interested in survival, if I have to trade my soul for it." Lucian smiled. "You gave that up the day you started killing for balance, and you gave it up the day you decided balance was too slow. The fight was fast, brutal, no words, no glory, just breath and blood and memory." It ended with Lucian on his knees, breath ragged, a blade at his throat. But Elias didn't strike. "You won't survive prison," Lucian said. "That's not the point," Elias whispered. The authorities arrived. Minutes later, tipped off by Kiran's signal and a data drop that had gone live the moment the diplomat was secured. The entire summit was exposed. Live feeds, audio files, documents, broadcast in real time to journalists in 5 countries. No blood, just truth. It was more disruptive than any bullet. Elias turned himself in that night. No lawyers, no defense. He gave a full, anonymous testimony under the name of an old alias, one the world had forgotten. The tribunal never made the documents public. Some said they were buried to preserve diplomatic ties. Others said he was too valuable, too dangerous, too useful to let disappear into a cell. Days later, he vanished. No record of his release. No confirmed sightings. Only a letter delivered to Kiran by hand, sealed in wax, unsigned. Inside, a single sentence: "You're what I could never be, lead us home." She read it at sunrise, standing on the same cliffside in Santorini, where Elias had once stared into the sea. The veil was hers now, but it wasn't the veil anymore. Not exactly. It was something new. She didn't train assassins. She trained observers, analysts, storytellers, guardians, people who exposed what others tried to bury. They didn't kill unless it was the last option. They didn't disappear into shadows. They walked in plain sight. 1 year later, in Lisbon, the restored sanctuary opened in a former convent. Its walls were bare, except for a single inscription, carved above the entrance, in the original language of the veil. True loyalty is not silence. It's the courage to speak when it matters most. And beneath it, her own addition: "We are no longer afraid of the light." Kiran stood there alone, wind catching the edge of her coat, her eyes on the horizon. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't running. She wasn't avenging. She was building, and in a world still steeped in secrets, she was becoming the one thing that power feared most: accountable, unseen, uncompromised. There are stories that begin with fear explosions, betrayals, bodies hitting the ground. But this story began in silence, and it ended in one too. Not the silence of secrecy, the silence of understanding. Elias was never meant to be a hero. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't wear a cause. He didn't dress his violence in righteousness. He lived in the in-between, the gray. He entered the veil not to become a killer, but to find a reason for the pain he carried. He thought discipline would save him, that control could be a kind of redemption. But the truth was simpler, harder. No amount of control can erase what you've done. The only thing it can do is change what you choose next. For years, Elias operated by a code: kill only for balance, act only when necessary, speak only in silence. He believed those rules made him better than the men he hunted. But over time, even the sharpest code dulls against human complexity. He killed people who deserved to die. And yet, each time he did, a little more of his reflection disappeared from the mirror, not because he enjoyed it, but because he learned to do it without flinching. Until one day, he flinched. That day was Damascus. That moment was a mirror, and everything he believed fractured. When he walked away from the assignment, he wasn't walking away from killing. He was walking away from the part of himself that could justify anything. He exiled himself to Santorini, not to hide but to remember what it felt like to breathe without justification. But life, like pain, is cyclical. And then came Kiran. She was everything he once was: bright, angry, controlled, driven not by greed or glory, but by the wound of losing someone who stood for something in a world that punished people for standing. Her sister's death was a trigger. Her silence was a weapon. Her mind, sharper than any blade. She took the oath not out of loyalty, but because she believed there was no other way to hold the world accountable. And in Elias, she didn't find a mentor. She found a mirror. Together, they walked the fire. Varanasi, Prague, Fez, Vienna, Kyoto, Lisbon. Each city carved something new into their bones. Each mission wasn't just about the target hit, was about who they were becoming in pursuit of justice. In Prague, they learned that betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in hesitation, in the silence between what you know and what you say. In Fez, they learned restraint, that not every mission ends in death end. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to walk away when vengeance is right in front of you. In Vienna, they faced ideology. Elias stood against Lucian, not just with fists, but with memory, with principle, with the weight of years spent believing in a code that no longer fit the modern world. In Kyoto, they were forced to confront themselves. No enemies, no noise, just the unfiltered truth of what they had become. Kiran found the anger she clung to was only a shell. Elias found the boy he buried, still watched him with disappointment. And in Lisbon, they wrote the final chapter, not with bullets, but with truth. Lucian was exposed. The network crumbled. The diplomat was saved. The summit failed. No deaths, no collateral. Elias gave himself up not as a sacrifice but as a statement. Even those who have walked in shadows must eventually step into the light. And Kiran, she didn't just survive, she evolved. She took the ashes of an organization, born in secrecy, and turned it into something new, open, accountable, incorruptible. Not because she was perfect, but because she believed something Elias had stopped believing for years, that the world still deserved people who didn't give up on it. In the end, they weren't assassins, they were restorers. And that's what makes this story matter, not the kills, not the betrayals, not the strategy or espionage, but the humanity beneath it all. The people behind the mission, the souls under the silence. Because beneath every code is a person, and behind every person is a choice. The lessons we see are arbitrate, may never hold a blade to someone's throat. You may never hide in alleys, or break encryption, or dismantle a weapons summit under moonlight, but you will be faced with moments of silence, moments when speaking is harder than staying quiet, when the easiest option is to look away, to let someone else carry the weight of doing what's right. The story of Elias and Kiran is about the courage to act in those moments. It's about the power of restraint in a world that teaches us to react. It's about listening to the voice in you that asks, what kind of person do I want to be when no one is watching? Here's what you can take from this story. Loyalty is not blind obedience. True loyalty isn't about following rules at all costs. It's about holding others accountable, even those we love. Even ourselves. Silence can be violent. The choice to say nothing, to stay uninvolved, to keep your hands clean can have consequences just as real as pulling a trigger. Restraint is not weakness. In Fez, Kiran learned that mercy is a muscle. The choice not to act when provoked isn't cowardice, wisdom, especially when lives hang in the balance. Reflection matters. Kyoto was more than a location, it was a mirror. When was the last time you looked at yourself, truly looked and asked whether your actions align with your values? Evolution is painful, but necessary. Elias evolved, slowly, painfully, and not without losses. But had he stayed frozen in the old code, he would have become the thing he once stood against. Growth requires surrender. Power is not the goal, impact is. Kiran didn't want to lead because she wanted control. She led because she had something to protect. If you're chasing influence, ask yourself, for what, for whom? You are allowed to change. The biggest myth in our culture is that once we choose a path, we are trapped in it. Elias chose to walk away, and then, eventually, he chose to return differently. You can pivot. You can begin again. Applying this to your LIFAs, yourself, these questions. Where in my life have I stayed silent when I should have spoken? Who am I loyal to? And is that loyalty healthy, reciprocal, and honest? Am I reacting or responding with thought and restraint? When was the last time I questioned what success looks like to me? Have I made peace with the person I used to be? Or am I still running? In a world addicted to speed and noise, what Elias and Kiran offer is an invitation to stillness, to thoughtful action. 2. The idea that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be brutal to be strong. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of leadership. You just have to choose. Again and again, to do the hard thing when it matters most, to listen when others scream, to pause when others act, to speak when others stay quiet, and sometimes, to walk away, not because you're afraid, but because you finally know who you are. This story is fiction, but the questions it leaves behind are real, and in a world starving for meaning, maybe that's all we need. A story that dares us not to be fearless, but to be fully human.